2 today. A few of you have submitted changes to your LinkedIn profiles, and every change I've received, I've upgraded grades with. If you still don't have a 10 out of 10, look at the comments I've made. I'll help you fix it. I want everybody to get a perfect score. Your next assignment is due on the 15th in here. I'm asking you to watch a video that I posted on Chapter 2 about how cobalt is harvested. Cobalt, of course, being a component to all of our smartphones to make some ethical judgments, because ethics in business are not simple. It's something that's very complicated, something we have to work at. We talked about the Ford Pinto and how terrible that was. The very fact, for your recollection, the Ford made the decision on money versus human lives. That's something I think most of us can agree is a pretty horrendous decision to make. If you're saying we're going to let people burn to death because it's cheaper than fixing the cars. But we see ethical problems not just in the United States, but all over the world. One of the most famous happened in Bangladesh. Bangladesh, India, of course, is home for a lot of garment production. We make a lot of clothing in India. If you've ever, raise your hand if you've ever heard the term sweatshop labor. Does anybody know why they call them sweatshops? Why do we call these kinds of organizations sweatshops? Yes?
Lots of people pack their room, poor ventilation, not a lot of light. It's just like it's a grimy place.
It's a hellish place to work. And they call them sweatshops because you're packing like sardines with no air conditioning, working in terrible conditions. Well, there was a very famous garment fire in India where everybody who was working in the factory burned to death. And you may say to yourself, why didn't people just leave? It was because the doors were locked from the outside. Literally, people were locked into work. So we see this in other places beside the United States as well. Who here knows anything about Enron? Have you ever heard of the company Enron? Enron was a publicly traded company. They worked in petroleum. Everybody at the top of the company knew that a bubble was about to burst. They knew that their share prices were about ready to tank. So what did the guys at the top do? They sold off their shares, made a bunch of money, and left the company to completely implode for everybody else. So that's what we also refer to as insider trading. We're going to be talking more about that when we get into the world of finance. Penn State. Guys, what happened at Penn State in the last 5 years that changed everything for college athletics? Oh, surely somebody's heard about the Penn State scandal. Greg, you're nodding your head. What happened at Penn State? It's terrible. Jerry Sandusky was a coach at Penn State who had been molesting players, and not players so much, but children who were coming to participate in athletic programs, and had gotten away with it for decades before it came to light. And there was a whole chain of people who reasonably knew what was happening and chose to do nothing while this guy molested children. And that's why we have so many of the laws in place to protect people who are college athletes now or at colleges, because of what Jerry Sandusky did. Firestone and Ford. Ford Explorer was the most popular vehicle of the 90s. And all of a sudden, we had all these rollover accidents. Well, here's what was happening. The ride for the Ford Explorer was a really poor ride, the early models. And so Firestone, the tires that were put on the cars, they deflated the tires to a point where it would make the handling a little better, but under hard braking, the tires themselves would come apart and the cars would roll over. And then we get into our guy, Bernie Madoff. Who here could tell me anything about Bernie Madoff? Led the largest Ponzi scheme in history. Now, here's what's funny. Like, normally people's last names don't really give them away. It's like, if my last name was Kent Teaches Business, for example, if that were my last name, or my wife's name was Melissa, I cook really good. This guy was a stockbroker, and his name was Bernie Madoff. Are you guys going to put money into a guy whose last name is Madoff? This guy orchestrated the biggest Ponzi scheme in history. And we're going to start today with a little video about how this happened. And we're going to talk about what kind of implications there were for people who suffered. It's okay if you don't know what it means, because we're going to explain it to you. And what I'm about to put on the board is a way to kind of think about investments in general. When you think about putting your money someplace, how many of you have ever heard your parents use the expression, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is? Yeah, we've all heard that. And most of the time it's correct. So let's start in the 1960s. We're going to say the late 1960s, and we're going to work our way to 2008, when Madoff finally got busted. Here's the way a Ponzi scheme works. You take one person who is at the top. In this case, it's Bernie himself, who is the man behind this scheme. He's claiming basically, I'm going to invest my money in all kinds of things. I'm going to put it in stocks, bonds, securities, whatever. What he is promising to his investors is a guaranteed rate of return. If you give me this much money and invest, you'll get this much money back out. So the first two investors start putting money into Bernie's scheme. And he's investing and doing a pretty legit job, and they're getting rates of return that are pretty good because actually Bernie Madoff is a pretty smart guy. So these two guys start saying, well, we need to get our friends involved because our friends want into this as well. So as a result, more money starts coming in. And it spreads out and spreads out and spreads out. Bernie builds this entire scheme on the idea that there will always be more money coming in than going out. When do most people take their money out of the markets? At what point in their lives? When you hear your parents saying they're investing in their 401k, what are they really looking at? Exactly right. In the United States, because Social Security is not something we can count on, we invest heavily in our own retirement. So to keep a scheme like this operating, promising crazy rates of return, you have to perpetually get more people paying in than are paying out. Well, that worked out okay because Bernie was living a lavish lifestyle. People were giving him more and more money to invest, and it was going okay. In fact, I read a really great book about Madoff, and he actually had a big attitude, a big ego. He made you feel like you were special if he even let you into his investment. You had to have an in. Not anybody can invest money with Bernie Madoff, which is why his victims were all really wealthy people, high-status people who dumped all of their money into this. It worked out okay until right about 2008. Guys, what happened in 2008? You guys, please mask up, please. What happened in 2008? You've probably heard your parents talk about it. We had a bubble that burst. Guys, in the United States, when we put money into the markets, it goes to lots of places. Here's the trick, and I promise this is all fitting together. When you put money in the bank, they don't just keep your money. They invest it other places. They invest it in real estate. They invest it in the market. They invest all over. The reason the banks pay you any interest at all is so they can use your money to invest. What happened was everybody at the same time started having trouble paying their mortgage because we had given mortgages to people that were higher than they could afford. And as a result, in 2008, we had this incredible recession, and people started pulling their money out of the markets, or their investments were worth nothing. Bernie Madoff, because he'd been lying to everybody, basically said, we can still get you a good rate of return. So people basically went to say, okay, Bernie, you protected our money. Thank you. We need our money now because everything else is gone. And they started bleeding the system. Within a matter of weeks, 2008 wasn't even over, and the entire house of cards came crumbling down. And everybody basically found out that the money they had dumped into Bernie with his unrealistic claims of high rates of return was one big lie. If you were one of the people who was early on or higher up on the pyramid, you never got your money. So we're talking about people, some folks literally were losing $2 and $3 billion. And not just the fact, it's easy to say, well, why should we feel sorry for rich people? These folks had put all of their money into Bernie, everything. So when I say overnight, people lost everything, I mean literally everything. That's what can happen when we trust too much in a scheme that seems too good to be true. So a Ponzi scheme, by the way, is there another name for a Ponzi scheme based on the shape I put up on the table? It's a pyramid scheme. So if you're the pharaoh up on top, you're making money. The folks at the bottom, just like the people who built the pyramid, got the worst of it. So that's what to remember about Bernie Madoff. And that's why if somebody's promising you, by the way, if you ever go to invest in a market or an investment scheme or any kind of place that's telling you to grow your money, if they're asking you, if they're offering you a guaranteed rate of return, think twice. The markets are volatile. Nothing is guaranteed. If they're guaranteeing you a rate of return, they might be selling you something that they can't actually pull off. Or as we like to say in the vernacular, their mouth is writing a check that their ass cannot cash. Just remember that term. So That's some colorful diagrams for the Wednesday morning. All right, but we're continuing our discussion of ethics, guys. Who here can tell me anything about Volkswagen? We talked about them in the last class. What did Volkswagen do wrong? Yes. From a tech standpoint, it's pretty impressive. If you can program a car to actually lie to an analysis computer about how efficient it really is, that from a technological standpoint, that's pretty impressive. From an ethical standpoint, it's pretty heinous. We're going to start off today with yet another video. We're going to be doing a few environmentally friendly. Now you realize you're driving a very heavily polluting vehicle. You've lost your resale value on this car as well. You've been basically hit twice with this stuff. And guys, your resale value is going to be next to nothing. Nobody wants to buy these cars. Here's what's really interesting. Did you catch that Volkswagen, in the process of getting here, became the largest automaker in the world? Toyota, in the early 2000s, made it all the way to the largest car manufacturer in the world. At the same time, they were hit with the scandal of sudden acceleration in their Prius models, where literally the car would start going forward and you could not make it stop. A few people were actually killed in those accidents. The company was cutting corners for profit. The company set the goal to be the biggest in the world, and people ended up dying. Same thing happened with Volkswagen. So sometimes when we put profit too far ahead of people, bad things can result. There's a balancing act here too, guys. These companies are designed to be profitable. If you're an automaker, you want to sell lots of cars. You want people to want your product. But there's a balancing act too in the fact that we owe it to our consumers to keep them safe as well. We're going to be talking a lot about this balancing act because some of you may be in a position to be making decisions like this. Not every decision in the business world is so far-reaching as Volkswagen. Not everything is about life and death. But you're going to be making decisions on things like people's health care if you're a manager. You're going to be making decisions on pay raises, potentially, if you're a managerial accountant. Before we move on to some of the examples, who here can tell me, by the way, Volkswagen, the original Volkswagen Bug, what is unique about that car compared to cars we see in the United States today? Has anybody ever been in a vintage Beetle? What's different about those cars? Yes? The engine is in the back. If you look at a Volkswagen Beetle, which they are cool cars, my terrible drawing skills here, this is the back of the car, this is the front. The trunk is in the front. The engine is in the back right over the rear wheels, and the engine itself is air-cooled. So it doesn't use oil to cool it, it uses air to cool it. And these cars were so lightweight that people could literally pick them up. They were great to go in the snow because the engine was over the drive wheels, which were rear-wheel drive. They were tough to steer. And the original Volkswagen Bugs, the heating system worked based on the exhaust. So you got a little bit of exhaust in the cabin to warm up the car. If you ever get a chance to drive, anybody ever driven a vintage Bug? There's something else. You definitely should give it a shot if you get a chance. Okay, guys, in terms of things that we see as unethical, I'm not going to read all these to you, but other than to say we got a pretty good sense of right and wrong. We misrepresent our company. We outright lie to our consumers. In the case of Volkswagen, they were outright lying to people about what the cars were really capable of. If you are abusing people, things like sexual harassment, for example, we're taking advantage of people. If we are giving up their personal information, if we're not helping people stay private. How many of you, by the way, either are in healthcare majors or hope to work in healthcare? Yeah. HIPAA is a law to protect our personal information. So the idea of protecting this stuff, of protecting people's personal information, and this is a big one too. If we see something that's going wrong, and we know something is going wrong in our organization, if I know somebody's being mistreated or abused, and I don't do anything about it, I'm complicit in it. Number one, the person who I should be helping protect is suffering. Number two, I'm sending the message to everybody else that it's okay to treat people like this. Let me give you an example. Let's say in this class, every one of you studied hard for this test. We had a test in this class. Everybody studied hard. This side of the room here, well, actually, you guys, we're going to say you guys studied really hard. You guys studied kind of hard. At the end of it, you guys got 100 on the test. You guys got a 75. And I decide, what the hell? Everybody's doing okay in this class. We'll just give everybody 100%. The people who studied really hard, how do you feel about that? Yeah. Why did I bother putting the effort in if everybody gets the same ride anyway? It's the same in business. If we have people, Jake's showing up for work an hour early, and he's working hard the entire time. I'm rolling in 15 minutes late and leaving 15 minutes early, and we're getting paid the same. How long are you going to be working hard?
Not very long.
Not very long. And that's what we refer to as leading by example. So all of these things are ways that we abuse power. So some of the concepts we get into in companies and in general, these are kind of basic ethical concepts. When we think about justice, justice is a very unique term. It means that we basically believe that there's a fair system and everybody gets an equal shot. We believe that, we hope, in our companies and our country. We've got to work on that in our country. But in companies, is everybody held to the same standard? If somebody breaks the rules, is everyone punished equally? Then we look at another concept, which is called utilitarianism. And that's something we get into as a society. We kind of make decisions based on what's good for the greatest number of people. That's great if you're in the middle, but if you're one of the people on the edges of the decision, for example, it might not be a great outcome for you. A great example of this is when governments look at taxation. We're always talking about how we give a break to the middle class, which is why folks on the higher end of the tax spectrum who are paying more because they make more think it's unfair, and sometimes people on the low end aren't seeing much benefit because they're not making money anyway. So utilitarianism, how can you make the best outcome for other people? Deontology is a kind of a hot button term. And what that means is, are you absolved of your guilt because you did what you were told to do? We talk about this in war, for example. Sometimes people justify their actions by saying, I was just following orders. If I work at a company, I did what my boss told me to do. I was following orders. That doesn't really stand up sometimes when we go back and look at what was right and wrong, what people should have done. And then we get into the rights of the individual versus the rights of the collective. One of the most misunderstood concepts right now is free speech. Who here can tell me in their own words, and I promise you, I'm not going to tell you your answer is wrong. I'm going to ask you though, who here in their own words can tell me what the right to free speech means in the United States? What does it mean? We like to say we enjoy the First Amendment, but what does it actually mean? Somebody help me out here. I've been talking a lot today. But show of hands, who here believes in free speech? So everybody believes in it, but what does it mean? What does free speech mean? Any idea?
Your right to think and say what you believe, but there's obviously there's a limit to what you can say. What is socially acceptable in our culture.
For example, if I wanted to stand up on this table, if I literally wanted, well, the standing on the table part is not protected by free speech, but I'm going to do it anyway. If I want to stand up here and balance and look closely at this slide because I want to make sure I'm illuminated when I say this, that I think the first President Bush in the 90s had sound economic policies that did right by most of the American people, that's protected by free speech. Because it is a matter of public concern. And what that means is it's something that we have a right as Americans to have opinions about. Free speech under the First Amendment was meant to protect political speech so that you could not be persecuted or judged for your opinion representing how you participated in a democratic process. If I decided to walk out on the mall today and have a protest sign that says, St. Francis stinks, I hate this place, could I be fired for it? I could. That's not technically protected speech. I'm not talking about a matter of public concern unless there were other people who had the same opinion and it was something that was affecting the public writ large. Can you yell fire in a crowded theater and be protected? You cannot. And that's where we get into the idea of ethics. People who have power, people who have a pulpit, people who have the ability to talk to the American people or to large crowds have kind of a tough line to hoe in terms of what they can and cannot say as protected speech. So these are very big ethical concepts that we have to consider. So yeah, protected speech, free speech is not a flat-out guarantee to say whatever that you want. Let's move on, guys. Before we get into the ethics code, we're about a half hour into our experience today. Who amongst you has a question or comment? A question or comment for the good of the order today? or I may randomly call on somebody to ask a question today. Who is it going to be? Oh, I know how we're going to do this. Somebody give me a number between 1 and 20. 15. All right, good. I'm going to write that down. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Michael, you get to ask a question or make a statement today.
Since you're a Steelers fan, who do you think the Steelers will resign?
Who will they
Resign because they have so many free agents.
Honestly, Michael, I've been so tied into doctoral work for the last couple of months, I couldn't even give you a good answer. So I'm going to ask you to tell me what you think is going to happen.
I'm going to sign TJ Watt. I don't know about Bud Dupree. Mike Kelvin. Jeez, I forgot. We have like another 15 free agents. We're going to let Juju walk if you want.
Who do you want to stay?
Jesus.
Yeah. Anybody else have an opinion on that? Anybody else a Steelers fan here want to weigh in? It's a good question. The number thing is a good way to go. I like that. That makes it very fair. It's very fair and unbiased. It's a very ethical way to put somebody on the spot. But guys, in terms of how companies encourage people to act ethically, we think about walking the walk and talking the talk. When I say somebody is walking the walk, what do I mean? What does it mean to walk the walk? Well, definitely confident. Yeah, I'm the man. But when we're walking the walk in the company, we say that's a good answer. When we say walking the walk versus talking the talk, what's the difference? Action. Somebody can say good things all day long. We value our customers. We love our students. We do all these things. But what we do in action is what sends the message. So if you're a good manager, for example, I'll give you an example of a great manager. My boss, how many of you have ever had an interaction with Dr. Randy Fry? Yeah, pretty cool guy, right? He loves being a teacher. He loves doing right by students. He is walking the walk and talking the talk. He's the real deal. And what he does by doing that is he sets a standard for the people who work for him that the buck stops here. You've got to live up to the standards to which that man has set. And they're pretty high. So we start by setting standards and living them out. If Dr. Fry said those things and didn't do them, if he said we need to be good teachers but didn't hold people accountable, if he said we needed to love our profession but he muddled through his lectures, it would be hollow words. But then we get into the idea of training. I want you to remember this, guys. You cannot force somebody to adopt your beliefs. You can make them behave in a certain standard. For example, somebody who does not believe, and when I say this, guys, I'm not setting judgment on whatever you believe. St. Francis University cannot make anybody believe that a mask is effective. They can't enforce a mask policy. That's an example of what we can do with ethics as well. So we've got two kinds of ethics codes. One is called integrity, which is meaning we're appealing to people to do the right thing because it's the right thing. And then we have compliance-based ethics codes, which means you're going to do the right thing or you're going to get punished. An example of masking would be saying to the instructors, we would really like you to wear a mask because it slows the spread of the illness. We want to set a good example for our students. A compliance-based approach would be, if we catch you in the classroom without one, you're fired. And by the way, nobody's ever said that to me. I'm using that as an example. So that's the difference between integrity and compliance. Which is more powerful? If we said sticking with a person, which is more powerful, integrity or compliance? So compliance, it depends on the industry. Compliance can be very effective. If you're threatening somebody's employment. Oh, I'm sorry. Did somebody say, I'm sorry? Compliance? Yeah, because you can punish somebody, right? Is there a vote for integrity as well? I'd say the higher up you get in an organization, the more integrity ultimately matters. Because people who are powerful in organizations, if you're appealing to them as people who set trends, as people who set examples, it works more. Let me give you an example too. If you're working in a fast food restaurant, somebody who's flipping burgers is probably going to respond more to compliance necessarily than being told the philosophy behind the decisions that are being made. So I think, in my opinion, guys, if you have an ethics code that sounds great that you don't enforce, I think it's worse than not having an ethics code at all. Why do I think that? Why is it worse to have an ethics code you don't enforce than to not have one at all? What do you think? thoughts, guys? Somebody help me out here.
If you have it and you're not enforcing it, it's just being hypocritical. That's worse than not doing anything at all.
Exactly right. You have a false sense of security. If we have an ethics code, it sounds great. We do wonderful things. I'm Bernie Madoff. I'm going to take care of your money and act ethically. I'm Google. I pledge not to be evil. By the way, that was Google's original mission statement, was to not be evil. So it's worse to have something that you're not actually living up to than to have no code at all. Because if you have no code at all, then you have no expectations. Agree or disagree? All right, guys, I'm going to ask you to do something for me. It's a Wednesday, and we got a cold start today. Stand up for a sec. Please stand up for a sec. Everybody, stand up. All right, guys. We're gonna do two things, and they're both repeat after me exercises to get you moving today. The first is, how many of you, when you were kids, ever listened to or watched the cartoon The Chipmunks? Okay, we're gonna skip the Chipmunks then. How many of you know who Bob Marley is? All right. So I want you to repeat after me, because how many of you have tests today? How many of you have other things that are stressing you out? How many of you wish you were getting more sleep? Okay. Repeat after me the words of Bob Marley. It was just his birthday this past week, by the way. Bob Marley, I think, would have been like 70 if he was still alive. Don't worry.
Don't worry.
About a thing. Because every little thing is going to be all right. And this one's for me. Say the following symbols. Ooh-ee. Ooh-ah-ah. Bing bang. Walla walla bing bang. You can have a seat. What that was a quote from a song from the Alvin and the Chipmunks about what friendliness and love sounds like. So there you go. So anyway, guys, you moved a little today, and you got tests. One more time. How many of you have tests today? How many of you are really stressed about these tests? You're going to be fine. I believe it. All right. We're going to talk about a couple other things, and I'm actually going to wrap it up just a little early today for those of you who need to get any last-minute studying in. By the way, you guys know the best way to study. Well, it's not for everybody, but I truly believe this. Don't cram right before a test. Did you get a good night's sleep last night? If you study before bed, your brain will take care of the rest. Just relax, take a breath, make sure to be hydrated. Maybe even, believe it or not, listen to a little classical music this morning. Get your brain going, even if you don't like classical. All right, how do we make ethical decisions? How do we know? Will somebody in this room tell me? Oh, we'll see how honest people are being today. How many of you have ever lied to your mom? What did it feel like? What's that feeling like? Describe it for me.
It's not good.
It's not good. Who else will tell me? What's it feel like?
Pretty bad.
Yeah. Do you feel it physically?
Yeah.
What do you feel like?
Stomach.
Pit of your stomach. Yeah. And the thing is, 9 times out of 10, do they know? Because they have like superhuman powers. Moms are like telepathic. They're like X-Men. So if we feel that feeling in the pit of our stomach when we're making a decision, that doesn't always mean it's a bad decision. Sometimes it's just a hard decision. But when we're doing something wrong, we can physically tell it. We call that the feelings test. And then we have what we refer to as the newspaper and social media test. And that means if you saw it on the front page of a paper, or if you read it on social media 2 days from now, would you feel bad that you put it out there? By the way, you guys, does anything on the internet ever really go away? When you delete it, it still really doesn't go away. So think about that. In fact, here's my test for you guys. For all social media, think about this. How would you feel if your grandmother read it? If you would put that test in any public social media you put out, you probably will never get in trouble. Some of the other tests, legality. Legality and ethics do not always mean the same thing, but generally speaking, our laws are based on some kind of ethics. Are we breaking the rules if we do something? And what would my family, what would my grandmother, what would my mom think if they saw the decision I was making? I can't imagine Bernie Madoff's mom would approve of the things that he has done. There are people who ultimately will blow the whistle. There are people who will tell the truth of what's going on. People who sound the alarm, and we call them whistleblowers. What this kind of refers to, back in the day, if you were working on a factory floor and you saw a defect, you could pull a whistle and it would stop the factory from moving so we could check to see what was wrong. So people who sound the alarm, it's risky sometimes to be a whistleblower. Why is it risky? If you're working for Ford Motor Company, why might it have been risky to tell the public about what was really happening with the Pinto? You could lose your job. Companies hold power over us, guys. They do. I mean, don't get me wrong, man. I'm a capitalist and I believe in a free market, but I think it's a mistake to assume that our companies don't hold some sway over us. Our incomes, our health insurance, our families, our friends, all this stuff is tied in. And guys, in some industries, it can even lead to people getting killed. This stuff has happened in the past. We're going to watch this video in the next class, but this lady's name is Karen Silkwood, and she sounded the alarm about what was happening with the nuclear power industry in the 1970s, and the amount of radiation that was really coming out into the environment, and she was killed for it. The company, nothing has ever been conclusively proven, but it's probably, by most accounts, the company took her out because they didn't want to get closed down. People have gotten killed. This happens all the time in business, guys, and it depends on the era and the industry, but sometimes it truly is a matter of life and death. That being said, guys, if we get one additional question, I'll give you 10 minutes of additional study time. So who here has a question or a comment? So that they can have 10 extra minutes of study time. Yes, sir.
What was your favorite vacation place?
Colorado Springs, man. I'd go there anytime. Best food in the United States, if I dare say so. I love green pork chili, and I'd go there anytime. What about you?
I would say England like 2 years ago. That was fun.
Where to?
England.
Nice. That's on my list too. Guys, have a wonderful day today. I will see you online on Friday.